When the Confederacy emerged in early 1861, its leaders imagined a future where up to 15 states would ultimately join their cause. Yet by the end of the year, it was becoming obvious that 4 key slaveholding border states were unlikely to defect and instead remained aligned with the Union. Considering that these states practiced slavery, had refused to vote for Lincoln, and held strong cultural ties to the South, this brings up an important question. Why did they stay with the United States instead of joining the Confederacy? The answer is more complex than it may seem. As you might expect, it wasn't simply a matter of slave states support secession. The political landscape across all slaveholding states was deeply complicated. During the 1860 election, Abraham Lincoln ran on a platform opposed to expanding slavery. But within the anti-slavery camp, Lincoln was considered a moderate. He rejected the spread of slavery into new territories but insisted that the federal government lacked authority to abolish slavery where it already existed, and even if it had that power, he wouldn't push for it. Slaveholders largely distrusted this stance and instead backed the Democratic Party, historically associated with supporting slavery and the Southern economy. Their candidate, Stephen A. Douglas, Lincoln's longtime rival, hoped to bridge North and South through the idea of popular sovereignty, allowing each state's residents to decide whether slavery would be legal. But this plan collapsed. President James Buchanan disliked Douglas and his approach. As a result, Buchanan and other pro-slavery Southern Democrats boycotted the nomination process, choosing instead their own candidate, John C. Breckinridge. He campaigned on guaranteeing slavery at the federal level and hinted that Southern states might secede if he lost. Splitting the pro-slavery vote would seem disastrous, but remarkably, the fragmentation didn't end there. A fourth candidate, John Bell, entered the race representing the Constitutional Union Party, whose stance was essentially slavery is fine, but secession is not. With the anti-slavery Republicans unified behind a single candidate, Lincoln won the election, unsurprisingly, and prepared to enter the White House. Despite the fractured vote, many state-level results were extremely close. Lincoln's victory triggered waves of secession. These states, whether through legislative action or public referenda, eventually left the Union. But in the border states, fierce debates erupted over whether to follow them or remain. So, why did these states ultimately stay? The first major factor was economic. Slavery was simply not as central to their economies as it was in the Deep South. While many voters supported the continuation of slavery, they weren't willing to risk the dangers and instability of secession. And Lincoln, famously clever, recognized this. He understood he would never persuade the most committed Democrats that slavery was safe under his leadership, but he did believe the border states were still persuadable. He needed them on his side. Losing them would have massively strengthened the Confederacy. To entrust, he appointed pro-Union Southerners to important federal positions and emphasized repeatedly that he would not interfere with slavery where it already existed. Even so, this wasn't enough to prevent internal secessionist movements. Large portions of the population still favored joining the Confederacy. And soon enough, political strain turned into military conflict, and the Civil War began. Immediately after fighting erupted, Lincoln requested troops from the remaining states. The border states refused, unwilling to fight either side. Soon after, several of them aligned with the Confederacy. One state did not, Delaware. Despite being a slave state, it had a very small enslaved population and was overwhelmingly pro-Union. And even if secession had been popular, the state was surrounded by Union territory, meaning it would have been swiftly occupied. Kentucky, Missouri, and Maryland all declared neutrality early in the war. Many citizens wanted to remain in the Union, but refused to take up arms, fearing internal conflict and the destruction that came with being a battleground. Maryland, located next to Washington, D.C., was strategically vital. The population was sharply divided, leading to riots. Governor Thomas Holiday Hicks, a pro-Union figure, considered holding a convention to decide on secession, but located it in a small Union-leaning town. Many secessionist legislators arriving to participate were quickly arrested. The remaining members voted to stay in the Union while refusing to allow federal troops to pass through the state. This became irrelevant once Lincoln imposed martial law. The legality was questionable, but Lincoln prioritized winning the war. His actions ensured Maryland remained under Union control. Kentucky and Missouri faced similar internal divisions. In Kentucky, the legislature supported the Union while the governor remained uncertain. To avoid civil conflict, the state declared neutrality and demanded that both sides stay out. Lincoln agreed, hoping to keep Kentucky from drifting toward the Confederacy. Younger generations tended to support secession, and most of the state militia opposed outside interference. The governor upheld neutrality, ordering both Union and Confederate forces to stay out, but the Confederacy refused to wait. Seeking control of the state's critical railroads, they invaded. The Union responded by entering the state as well. The governor insisted both leave, but the legislature blamed the Confederacy for violating neutrality and chose to commit fully to the Union. A pro-Confederate government was established in occupied areas and gained symbolic seats in the CSA Congress, but it wielded little real authority. Missouri experienced an almost identical story. Governor Claiborne Jackson was pro-Confederacy and demanded federal troops leave. When they refused, he mobilized the state militia and asked for Confederate assistance. Before he could act, Union forces attacked and forced him to flee the capital. The Union maintained control over most of the state for the rest of the war. The Confederacy claimed Missouri as a member, but pro-secession factions held almost no actual influence. Later, John C. Fremont, the former Republican presidential candidate, took command of the region and unilaterally declared all enslaved people in Missouri free, while also ordering the execution of rebel fighters. This outraged locals, and Lincoln swiftly removed him for harming the Union's image. Over time, pro-secession sentiment in these border states declined. As the Confederacy repeatedly failed in its offensives and foreign powers refused to recognize it, many people concluded that secession was a losing bet. Additionally, some Confederate policies alienated the border states. The CSA Constitution permanently protected slavery, allowing no path for future abolition even if public opinion changed. The Confederacy also centralized authority, introducing drafts and limiting states' autonomy, ironically mirroring complaints Southern states had once made about Washington. By 1864, the Confederacy's defeat was obvious. When Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, it didn't apply to the border states, including the new state of West Virginia, though most soon abolished slavery independently. Kentucky and Delaware held onto the practice until the 13th Amendment ended slavery nationwide after the war. Remaining in the Union spared these states from the worst destruction, and unlike the Deep South, they had substantial influence during the Reconstruction era that followed. Interestingly, many Kentuckians only began identifying culturally with the South after the war, leading some to joke that Kentucky joined the Confederacy only once it had already lost. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like the video and subscribe so you never miss the next chapter. See you in the next mystery.